Welcome, beautiful souls, to Her True Stories, where we share the raw, unfiltered experiences of women who refuse to be silenced, dismissed, or forgotten. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Today's story is about betrayal so deep it cuts to the very core of motherhood itself. Imagine sacrificing everything for your child's happiness, giving them your last dollar, your final hope, only to be told you're not worth a seat at their wedding. But what happens when a mother's quiet strength becomes an unstoppable force of justice? This is Aliar's story, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this one ends. My name is Aliar Gray, and at 58, I've learned that the most devastating betrayals come wrapped in the familiar voices of those we love most. I was sitting in my modest living room, my suitcase packed, and waiting by the front door like an eager child on Christmas morning. The Hawaiian shirt I'd bought specifically for the occasion hung pressed and ready in my bedroom closet, tag still attached. My flight confirmation was printed and triple-checked, tucked safely in my purse beside the boarding pass I'd been looking forward to using for months. Daniel's wedding. My only son's wedding. The wedding I'd paid for with $50,000, every penny of my savings, every cent I'd scraped together after my husband Richard's death 3 years ago. Money I'd saved from clipping coupons, working extra shifts at the hospital where I'd been a nurse for 35 years, selling pieces of my jewelry when the bills got too high. But it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night worrying about money, every meal of ramen noodles so I could send Daniel another 1,000 when he called asking for help. It was all worth it for this moment. My son's happiness was everything to me. The laptop chimed with an incoming email, and my heart fluttered with excitement. Maybe it was Daniel with last-minute details about the ceremony, or perhaps Sophie with information about the rehearsal dinner. I'd been trying so hard to connect with my future daughter-in-law, though she'd remained politely distant throughout their engagement. I clicked open the email, my reading glasses perched on my nose, a smile already forming on my lips. The smile died instantly. Subject: Wedding update. Imum. Sophie and I have been talking, and we've decided to keep the ceremony small and intimate, just immediate family and our closest friends. We know you'll understand. If you'd like to be part of it, here's the Facebook Live link. The ceremony starts at 4 p.m. Hawaii time. Love. Daniel. I stared at the screen, my hands beginning to tremble. The words blurred together as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. Small and intimate. Immediate family. But wasn't I immediate family? Wasn't I the woman who gave birth to him, raised him alone after his father left when he was 12, worked double shifts to pay for his college, his car, his apartment deposits, his dreams? $50,000. I'd given them $50,000 for this wedding, money I didn't have, money I'd borrowed against my tiny house, money that would take me years to pay back on my nurse's salary. And they were telling me to watch it on Facebook like some distant acquaintance. My phone was right there on the coffee table. I could call Daniel, demand an explanation, fight for my place at my own son's wedding. But something in that email, the casual dismissal, the assumption that I'd simply understand, stopped me cold. Instead, I typed a response with steady fingers, even as my heart shattered. That's fine. 2 words. That's all they deserved. I hit send, closed the laptop, and sat in the growing darkness of my living room, staring at the suitcase that would never make it to the airport. The Hawaiian shirt stayed in my closet, tags still attached. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I'd spent the night alternating between rage and heartbreak, finally settling into a numb acceptance that felt like ice in my chest. My phone had been buzzing all morning, Daniel's name flashing on the screen over and over again. 13 missed calls by noon. But I wasn't ready to hear his voice. wasn't ready for whatever excuse he'd constructed to justify cutting his mother out of the most important day of his life. At 3:30 p.m. my time, 9:30 a.m. in Hawaii, I opened my laptop and clicked on the Facebook Live link. The screen filled with pristine white sand and crystal blue water. Palm trees swayed gently in the background, and an elegant arch of white flowers framed the altar. It was beautiful, breathtakingly beautiful. The kind of wedding I'd dreamed of giving my son. The kind of wedding I'd paid for but wasn't invited to attend. I heated up a frozen dinner, Salisbury steak and mashed potatoes, and sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open, watching strangers prepare for my son's wedding ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was eating a $3 frozen meal while watching a $50,000 wedding I'd funded but couldn't attend. The music began, and guests took their seats in elegant white chairs arranged perfectly on the beach. I recognized none of them. Sophie's family, probably her parents, siblings, aunts, and uncles. Her co-workers from the marketing firm where she worked. Daniel's college friends, some of whom I'd fed at my dinner table more times than I could count. But no Aliar Gray. No mother of the groom. No woman who'd given everything she had to make this moment possible. Sophie appeared first, walking down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. She was beautiful, I had to admit, blonde, poised, everything I wasn't and had never been. The camera followed her journey to the altar, where the minister waited with a warm smile. Then Daniel appeared, and my breath caught in my throat. My boy, my beautiful boy, looked so handsome in his white linen suit. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his face glowing with happiness I hadn't seen since he was a child. He was grinning from ear to ear as he walked down that aisle, waving to guests who cheered and applauded. This was my son, the baby I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights, the toddler who'd run to me when he scraped his knees, the teenager I'd supported through heartbreaks and failures, the young man I'd sacrificed everything to help succeed. And he'd chosen to celebrate the most important moment of his life without me. The ceremony began, and I found myself leaning closer to the screen, desperate to catch every word, every gesture, every moment of this wedding I'd financed but been barred from attending. The minister spoke about love, commitment, the joining of two families. 2 families. What a joke. When they exchanged rings, I noticed Daniel's, the gold band I'd bought him for his 21st birthday, the one he'd worn every day since. At least some part of me was there, even if I wasn't. "You may kiss the bride," the minister announced, and Daniel swept Sophie into his arms as the small crowd erupted in cheers. The camera panned across the celebrating guests, and I saw the joy on every face. Sophie's parents crying happy tears, Daniel's college friends raising glasses of champagne, everyone united in celebration. Everyone except the woman who'd made it all possible. The live stream ended abruptly, leaving me staring at a blank screen in my quiet kitchen. My frozen dinner sat untouched, congealed and cold. Outside, it was starting to rain. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence, feeling something shift inside me. The grief was still there, the heartbreak still raw and bleeding. But underneath it all, something else was growing. Something cold and calculating and sharp as a blade. My phone buzzed again. Daniel still trying to call. This time, I turned it off completely. If my son wanted to treat me like I didn't exist, I could return the favor. But first, I had some phone calls of my own to make. After 35 years as a nurse, 25 years managing my late husband's medical practice, and 3 years of carefully navigating widowhood, I'd learned a thing or two about strategy, patience, and the delicate art of consequences. Daniel thought he could take my money and discard my presence. He was about to learn how wrong he was. But I wouldn't act in anger. I'd act in ice-cold calculation, the way I'd learned to handle every crisis in my career, every emergency that required steady hands and clear thinking. Tomorrow, I'd begin teaching my son the most expensive lesson of his life. Monday morning found me sitting in the waiting room of Eckhart, Morrison and Associates, dressed in my best black suit and carrying a leather portfolio that had belonged to my late husband. I'd spent the weekend researching, planning, and preparing for this meeting with a methodical precision I'd once applied to surgical procedures. James Eckhart had been our family lawyer for 15 years, handling Richard's medical practice contracts, our wills, and the complex financial arrangements we'd made for Daniel's future. He was a man of discretion and sharp legal mind, exactly what I needed. Eliar, he said, rising from behind his mahogany desk as his secretary ushered me in. I was so sorry to hear about the wedding situation. Daniel's behavior was unexpected. I'd called James over the weekend, ostensibly to schedule a routine review of my will, but I'd let slip the details of my exclusion from the wedding. His reaction had been one of professional outrage. He understood better than most the legal and financial implications of what Daniel had done. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "I need to review some documents, and I think you'll find the situation quite interesting from a legal perspective." James opened the thick file that contained our family's financial history. "Let's start with the wedding payment. You mentioned it was $50,000. "Exactly $50,000, I confirmed, pulling out a folder of bank statements, receipts, and correspondence. "Transferred directly from my savings account to Daniel's checking account 6 months ago. "And this was for?"
"Wedding expenses."
"The venue, catering, flowers, photographer, travel costs for out-of-town guests. Daniel said they needed the money up front to secure everything." I paused, letting the implications sink in. I assumed, naturally, that as the mother of the groom who was funding the entire wedding, I would be attending. James studied the documents with the focused attention of a man who'd built his career on finding legal angles others missed. "Did Daniel ever explicitly promise you would be invited?" "He did better than that," I said, sliding another document across the desk. "He signed this." It was a simple agreement I'd insisted on when the amount got so large, a promissory note that detailed the loan terms and included a clause about repayment if the wedding was canceled or if I was excluded from the ceremony. At the time, Daniel had laughed and signed it without reading carefully, joking that of course I'd be there. James read the document twice, his expression growing more interested with each line. "This is quite comprehensive, Eliar. You essentially have a contract guaranteeing your attendance at the wedding in exchange for funding it." I was protecting myself, I said simply. Richard always told me to get everything in writing, especially with family. Wise advice. "And Daniel breached this agreement by excluding you from the wedding?" "Completely. I wasn't even informed that I was uninvited until the day before, via email, with the suggestion that I watch on Facebook Live instead of attending the ceremony I paid for." James leaned back in his chair, and I could see the wheels turning in his legal mind. "This gives us several options. We could demand immediate repayment of the full $50,000, plus interest and damages for breach of contract. We could also freeze any other financial arrangements you have with Daniel until this matter is resolved." "What other financial arrangements?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. James pulled out another thick folder. "The trust fund you and Richard established for Daniel when he turned 18. Currently valued at approximately $200,000, with you as the sole trustee until your death. There's also the business loan you co-signed last year, $60,000 for Daniel's consulting firm." I'd forgotten about that loan. Daniel had needed capital to start his business, and his credit wasn't good enough to qualify on his own. I'd signed as guarantor without hesitation, as I always did when my son needed help. "And then there's your will," James continued. "Currently, Daniel inherits everything: the house, your retirement accounts, all remaining assets. Given recent events, you might want to reconsider those arrangements." The house was modest but paid off, worth maybe $120,000 in the current market. My retirement accounts held another $80,000 after years of early withdrawals to help Daniel through various crises. It wasn't a fortune, but it represented security, legacy, the final gift a mother could give her child. A gift Daniel had just proven he didn't deserve. "I want to make some changes," I said calmly. Effective immediately. For the next 2 hours, James and I worked through the legal mechanisms that would restructure Daniel's entire financial landscape. The trust fund would be frozen pending resolution of the wedding contract breach. The business loan would be called in for immediate repayment due to material changes in our relationship. My will would be completely rewritten. But the most elegant part of the plan involved someone Daniel had never even met. "Tell me about Emily Carson," James said, reviewing the notes I'd given him. Emily was the 24-year-old daughter of my best friend Margaret, who died in a car accident 2 years ago. Emily had been like a second daughter to me, especially after Margaret's death left her essentially orphaned. Her father had abandoned the family when she was young, and Margaret had been her only family. I'd been quietly helping Emily through nursing school, paying her tuition and living expenses while she worked toward her degree. She was everything Daniel wasn't: grateful, hardworking, genuinely caring about others rather than just herself. She called me Aunt Aliar and sent handwritten thank you notes for every kindness. "Emily is graduating from nursing school next month," I explained. "Top of her class, already has job offers at 3 different hospitals. She's been working as a CNA to support herself while studying, never asked for more help than she absolutely needed." "And you want to?" "I want to name Emily as my primary beneficiary. The house, the retirement accounts, everything that would have gone to Daniel." I paused, letting the magnitude of that decision settle. "I also want to offer Emily the opportunity to take over Daniel's position in the trust fund structure." James's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a significant change." "Emily has earned it through character and gratitude. Daniel has forfeited it through selfishness and cruelty." I signed the document James placed in front of me, my signature steady and sure. "I want everything legally bulletproof. If something happens to me tomorrow, Daniel shouldn't inherit so much as a coffee mug." "It will take a few days to process all the paperwork and file the necessary documents," James said. "Are you certain about this course of action? These changes will be very difficult to reverse." I thought about my son's face on that Facebook live stream, glowing with happiness as he celebrated the most important day of his life without the woman who'd made it possible. I thought about the casual cruelty of that email, the assumption that I'd simply understand and accept my exclusion. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I said. As I left James's office, my phone finally powered back on and immediately began buzzing with missed calls and messages. 27 calls from Daniel, 15 text messages, 2 voicemails marked as urgent. I deleted them all without listening. If Daniel wanted to explain himself, he could do it in person. But first, he was going to learn what it felt like when the money he'd always taken for granted suddenly disappeared. And then I was going to pay a visit to the young woman who was about to become the daughter I'd always deserved. Emily Carson lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the north side of town, in a building that had seen better decades, but was clean and safe. I'd been here before, dropping off groceries when I knew her part-time CNA salary wasn't stretching far enough, helping her study for exams at her small kitchen table. Today, I was here for a very different reason. Emily opened the door wearing scrubs. She must have just gotten off a shift at the nursing home where she worked nights to pay for school. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and exhaustion shadowed her brown eyes, but her face lit up when she saw me. "Aunt Aliar," she exclaimed, immediately pulling me into a hug. "What are you doing here? I thought you were supposed to be in Hawaii for Daniel's wedding." The wedding? Of course Emily would remember. I'd been talking about it for months, showing her pictures of the venue, discussing what to wear. She'd been genuinely excited for me, asking questions about Hawaiian culture and whether I'd ever been to a beach wedding before. The wedding happened, I said carefully. I watched it on Facebook Live. Emily's brow furrowed as she stepped back to look at me. Watched it? Why didn't you? Wait, you didn't go. I wasn't invited. The words hung in the small entryway like a toxic cloud. Emily's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to growing outrage. What do you mean you weren't invited? You're his mother. You paid for the whole thing. Apparently, they decided to keep it small and intimate, I said, borrowing Daniel's words. Immediate family only. But you are immediate family. Emily's voice rose with indignation. You're the most immediate family he has. How could he after everything you've done for him? I could see tears forming in her eyes. Tears for my hurt, my humiliation. When was the last time Daniel had cried for my pain instead of his own needs? Can I come in? I asked. There's something important I need to discuss with you. Emily's apartment was tiny but spotless, decorated with furniture from thrift stores and dollar store finds arranged, with the kind of care that comes from genuine appreciation for what you have. Medical textbooks were stacked neatly on every surface, and a small desk in the corner was covered with study materials for her upcoming nursing board exams. I'm sorry it's such a mess, she said, clearing newspapers from the couch so I could sit. I just got home from work, and I have to study for her. Emily, I interrupted gently. Stop apologizing. Your home is lovely, and you should be proud of everything you've accomplished. She sat across from me in a chair that was probably older than she was, but her attention was completely focused on my face. Are you okay? You seem different. Sadder, but also, I don't know, determined. Smart girl. She always had been. I need to tell you about some changes I'm making, I said. Changes that are going to affect both of us. For the next hour, I explained everything. Daniel's betrayal, the legal documents, the frozen trust fund, the rewritten will. Emily listened with growing amazement, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of what I was telling her. You're cutting Daniel out of your will completely? She asked when I finished. Completely. And I'm naming you as my primary beneficiary. Emily went very still. Aunt Aliar, I can't. You can't just. I can and I am. Emily, you've shown me more genuine love and gratitude in the past 2 years than Daniel has shown in his entire adult life. You send thank you notes for grocery money. You call to check on me when you're exhausted from work and school. You remember my birthday, ask about my health, care about my feelings. But he's your son, and you're the daughter of my heart, I said firmly. Blood doesn't guarantee love or loyalty or even basic human decency, but choice does. And I'm choosing you. Emily was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she struggled with the enormity of what I was offering. The house, your retirement money, all of it. All of it. But there's more. I pulled out another document James had prepared. I want you to finish nursing school without working. I want you to focus completely on your studies, graduate at the top of your class, and start your career without the burden of debt or financial stress. I can't take that much money from you. It's not taking, Emily. It's receiving. There's a difference. I reached across the small space between us and took her hands. When your mother died, I promised her I'd watch out for you. I've been doing that quietly in small ways. Now I want to do it completely. Emily was quiet for a long time, and I could see her processing not just the financial implications, but the emotional ones. She was about to become the center of a family drama she'd never asked to be part of. What about Daniel? She asked finally. When he finds out about all this, he's going to be so angry. Daniel has spent his entire adult life taking my support for granted while giving me nothing but demands and disappointment in return. Yesterday, he proved that my love and sacrifice mean nothing to him. So, why should his anger mean anything to me? But what if he tries to fight this? Legally, I mean? I smiled grimly. Let him try. James Eckhart is one of the best estate lawyers in the state, and every document is ironclad. Daniel breached his contract when he excluded me from the wedding. He has no legal standing to challenge any of the changes I'm making. Emily stood up and walked to her small window, looking out at the parking lot of her modest apartment complex. When she turned back to me, her expression was resolved but worried. If I accept this, if I let you do this for me, it changes everything, doesn't it? Yes, I said honestly. It changes everything. Daniel will hate me. Daniel doesn't even know you exist. And frankly, Emily, someone who could treat his own mother with such casual cruelty isn't someone whose opinion should matter to you. She was quiet again, and I could see her making the decision that would alter the trajectory of both our lives. Okay, she said finally. If you're sure this is what you want, if you're really sure, then okay. I accept. But Aunt Aliar, I promise you, I will never, ever take this gift for granted. I will make you proud every single day. I stood and pulled her into my arms, this young woman who was about to become my daughter in all the ways that mattered. You already make me proud, sweetheart. You already do. As I drove home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. The grief over Daniel's betrayal was still there, but it was balanced now by something else. Hope, purpose, the satisfaction of knowing that my love and resources were finally going to someone who would value them. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls from Daniel, but I continued to ignore them. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him experience just a tiny fraction of the anxiety and hurt he'd caused me. Tomorrow, the legal papers would be filed. The trust fund would be officially frozen. The business loan would be called in for immediate repayment. And Daniel would begin to learn what it costs to treat your mother like she was disposable while, depending on her generosity, to fund your life. The lesson was going to be expensive. But then again, the best education always was. Daniel showed up at my house on a Thursday evening, 3 days after the legal papers had been served. I was expecting him. James had called to confirm that the trust fund freeze was in effect, the loan had been officially called in, and Daniel's business accounts were essentially paralyzed until he could find alternative funding. I was in my living room reading a mystery novel when I heard his car door slam in my driveway. The engine sounded rough, his BMW was getting old, and without access to his trust fund, expensive repairs would be challenging. He didn't knock.
Of course he didn't.
Daniel had never needed permission to enter my home before, had never considered that his mother might not want to see him at any given moment. The front door opened and closed with a familiar bang that had marked his arrivals for 30 years.
Mom.
What the hell is going on? His voice carried from the entryway, loud and angry, and full of the righteous indignation of someone accustomed to getting his way. I didn't look up from my book. Hello, Daniel. How was the honeymoon? Don't you hello Daniel me. He appeared in the doorway of the living room, his face flushed with anger. His hair was disheveled, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of stress. My accounts are frozen. My business can't make payroll. The bank is demanding $60,000 I don't have. What did you do? I turned a page of my book, a thriller about a woman who discovered her family wasn't what she thought they were. Fitting. I simply exercised my legal rights as outlined in the contracts you signed, I said calmly. Perhaps you should have read them more carefully. What contracts? I never signed anything that said you could destroy my life over a wedding invitation. Now I did look up, meeting his eyes with the steady gaze I'd perfected during 35 years of dealing with difficult patients and their families. You signed a promissory note for $50,000 that explicitly stated the money was for your wedding expenses, with the understanding that I would be attending the ceremony. You also signed a business loan agreement that included clauses about material changes in our relationship affecting the terms. Daniel's face went pale as the legal implications began to sink in. You're calling in the loan because I didn't invite you to my wedding? I'm calling in the loan because you breached our agreement and demonstrated that you view our relationship as transactional. You get my money, I get nothing but disrespect in return. It wasn't personal. Sophie's family wanted a small wedding and you chose to honor Sophie's family's wishes while ignoring your own mother's feelings. You chose to take my $50,000 while excluding me from the event it paid for. You chose to announce your wedding to the world while treating me like some distant acquaintance who could watch on Facebook Live. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to come to me when he was in trouble. But I was done mothering him through crises of his own making. Look, I'm sorry about how it happened, okay? I should have handled it better. But you can't destroy my business over this. I have employees, responsibilities. You should have thought about your responsibilities before you decided to humiliate the woman who's been funding your life for 30 years. I'll pay you back. The $50,000. I'll pay every penny back with interest. With what money? Your business accounts are frozen, remember? Daniel began pacing my living room like a caged animal, his desperation becoming more apparent with each circuit. This is insane. You're my mother. You can't just cut me off because you're hurt about a wedding invitation. I can, and I have. James Eckhart assures me that every action I've taken is completely legal and enforceable.
Fine.
I'll get my own lawyer. I'll fight this. Please do. I'm sure Sophie will be thrilled to spend your honeymoon period dealing with legal fees. You can't afford to pay lawyers who will tell you exactly what James already told me, that you have no legal standing whatsoever. Daniel stopped pacing and stared at me as if seeing me for the first time.
Who are you?
This isn't like you. You've never been vindictive. You're right. I've never been vindictive. I've been generous to a fault, supportive beyond reason, and forgiving to the point of enabling your selfishness. But yesterday proved that my generosity has been wasted on someone who sees it as weakness rather than love. I don't see it as weakness. You excluded me from your wedding, Daniel. The wedding I paid for. You sent me an email the night before, like I was some casual acquaintance whose feelings didn't matter. That's not the behavior of someone who respects or values the person funding their life. Daniel slumped into his father's old recliner, his anger giving way to something that looked almost like defeat. Sophie's parents, they're very particular about their social circle. They thought it would be awkward having you there. The truth, finally. Or at least part of it. Awkward how? You know, your job, your house, your background. They're from old money, Mom. Country club people. They thought it would be better if the wedding looked more uniform. There it was. The real reason I'd been excluded wasn't about intimacy or family size. It was about class. About Sophie's wealthy parents being embarrassed by Daniel's working-class mother, the nurse who'd raised her son alone, who lived in a modest house and shopped at discount stores. And my son had agreed to it. Had chosen his in-laws' snobbery over his own mother's dignity. I see, I said quietly. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. We thought you'd understand. Understand that I wasn't good enough to attend the wedding I paid for? That my 30 years of sacrifice meant less than impressing your wife's parents. Daniel's face crumpled. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. And now you understand something, Daniel. Actions have consequences. You chose Sophie's family's opinion over your mother's feelings. You chose their money and status over the woman who actually loves you. Now you get to live with that choice. What do you want from me? What do I have to do to fix this? I closed my book and stood up, looking down at my son, this man I'd raised who'd become someone I barely recognized. There's nothing you can do to fix this, Daniel. The damage is done. The trust fund will remain frozen indefinitely. The loan is due in full within 30 days. And I've made other arrangements for my estate that no longer include you. Other arrangements? I've found someone more deserving of my generosity. Someone who actually appreciates love when it's given. Daniel's face went white. You're leaving everything to someone else? I am.
Who?
That's none of your concern. Mom, please. Don't do this. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We're family. Family doesn't exclude family from life's most important moments, Daniel. Family doesn't choose strangers' opinions over their own mother's heart. You've made it clear that our relationship is purely transactional for you. You take my money while giving me nothing but disappointment in return. That's not true. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling, how work was going, whether I was lonely in this house? When was the last time you showed any genuine interest in my life beyond what I could provide for yours? Daniel opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. That's what I thought, I said. You can see yourself out, Daniel. And from now on, call before you come. This is my house, and you no longer have an open invitation. Mom, wait.
No.
I've waited long enough. 30 years, in fact. I'm done waiting for you to become the son I deserved. I walked past him toward the stairs, leaving him sitting in his father's chair, finally understanding that the golden goose he'd been counting on had just flown away. And unlike in the fairy tale, there was no magic that could bring her back. The drive home from Mom's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and my mind was reeling from the conversation that had just destroyed my entire financial foundation. I had 30 days to come up with $60,000, or the bank would destroy my credit, seize my business assets, and probably force me into bankruptcy. My trust fund was frozen indefinitely. My mother, the woman who'd been my safety net for 30 years, had just cut me loose without a lifeline. And I had to go home and explain it all to Sophie. Sophie was in the kitchen when I walked through the front door of our apartment, still unpacking wedding gifts with the methodical precision she brought to everything. Crystal glasses, expensive china, silver serving pieces, all the trappings of the life she'd always wanted, the life I'd promised her. There you are, she said without looking up. I was starting to wonder if your mother had talked you into staying for dinner. Did you get the money situation sorted out? The money situation. As if it were just a simple misunderstanding instead of the complete collapse of everything we'd been counting on. Sophie, we need to talk. Something in my voice made her look up from the wedding gifts. She was still beautiful, would always be beautiful, but I could see the sharp intelligence in her eyes that I'd fallen in love with, the same intelligence that was now calculating the implications of my tone. What's wrong? She asked, but her voice was already cooling. Sophie had never been good with bad news. The trust fund is frozen.
Completely.
And Mom is calling in the business loan, all $60,000, due within 30 days. Sophie set down the crystal wine glass she'd been examining, placing it on the counter with infinite care. What do you mean frozen? I mean I can't access any of it.
Not a penny.
And my business accounts are locked up until I can find alternative funding. For how long? Indefinitely. Sophie was quiet for a very long time, and I could practically see her mind working through the financial implications of what I'd just told her. Our rent, our car payments, our credit card bills, the lifestyle we'd been building, all of it depended on my trust fund distributions and the steady income from my consulting business. Daniel, she said finally, her voice deadly calm. Please tell me you're not saying that your mother has cut off our income because she was upset about the wedding. It's more complicated than that. How is it more complicated? We made a practical decision about the guest list based on my parents' wishes and the venue limitations. Your mother should have understood that. The venue limitations. That was the story we'd told ourselves, the lie we'd constructed to make our decisions seem reasonable. But standing in our kitchen, surrounded by wedding gifts that cost more than my mother made in a month, the truth felt uglier. She paid for the wedding, Sophie. $50,000. And we didn't even give her a seat. She paid for it because we asked her to, because you said she wanted to contribute. And my parents offered to pay, but you insisted that your family should handle it. That wasn't exactly how it had happened. Sophie's parents had made a few polite noises about contributing, but they'd been relieved when I'd said my family would cover the costs. They'd gotten the wedding they wanted without opening their own wallets. The point is, legally, she had a right to be there, and we excluded her. Sophie's expression hardened. We excluded her because your mother doesn't fit with our social circle, Daniel. You know that as well as I do. She's a nurse who lives in a tiny house and shops at Walmart. My parents' friends would have spent the entire reception wondering who the odd woman out was. She's my mother. And she's also someone who apparently thinks it's appropriate to destroy our lives because her feelings were hurt. What kind of person does that to their own son? I stared at my wife of 4 days, and realized that she genuinely didn't understand why Mom was angry. In Sophie's world, people were judged by their bank accounts and their connections, and my mother had failed both tests. Sophie, she's been supporting me financially for years. The trust fund, the business loan, emergency money whenever I needed it. She's been my safety net since college. And you're her son. That's what parents do. Is it? Do your parents give you $60,000 when you need it? Do they set up trust funds and co-sign loans and send money without question whenever you ask? Sophie went very still. Her parents had money, old money, real money. But they'd never been particularly generous with it. Sophie worked for her lifestyle, earned her own salary, paid her own bills. The financial support I'd received from my mother was actually quite rare, even among wealthy families. That's different, she said finally. How is it different? Because my parents raised me to be independent. They didn't create a dependent relationship like your mother did with you. The words hit me like a slap. Dependent relationship? Daniel, you're 32 years old, and your mother still pays for your business expenses. You call her whenever you need money, and she sends it without question. That's not generosity. That's control. She never tried to control me. Didn't she? And now, the minute you make a decision she doesn't like, she destroys your livelihood. That sounds like control to me. I wanted to argue, but part of what Sophie was saying felt true. Mom had always been there with financial support, always ready to solve my problems with her checkbook. Had I become dependent on her in ways I'd never acknowledged? Even if that's true, I said slowly, what are we going to do about it now? I still need $60,000 in 30 days, or my business is finished. Sophie walked to the window of our apartment, looking out at the city skyline we'd chosen specifically because it made us feel successful. How much do you make from the consulting firm? Without the trust fund money. Maybe $40,000 a year if I'm lucky. And that's assuming I can keep the business running without the startup capital. And how much are our monthly expenses? I did the math in my head, adding up rent, car payments, insurance, credit cards, student loans, the country club membership Sophie insisted we needed for networking. About $6,000 a month. So, we're spending more than you make. We've been using the trust fund to make up the difference. Sophie turned back to me, and I could see something calculating in her expression. What about your mother's other assets? The house, her retirement accounts? If she's serious about punishing you, what stops her from changing her will? The question hit me like ice water. I'd been so focused on the immediate crisis, the frozen trust fund, the called loan, that I hadn't considered the longer-term implications. She wouldn't do that, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. Daniel, she just froze your trust fund and called in a business loan because you didn't invite her to our wedding. What makes you think she wouldn't change her will? I sat down heavily at our kitchen island, surrounded by wedding gifts I wasn't sure we'd be able to keep if we couldn't afford this apartment. She's my mother. Despite everything, she loves me. Love doesn't pay our bills. The coldness in Sophie's voice made me look up at her. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with, but something was different. The way she was looking at me, like I was a problem to be solved rather than her husband. Sophie, what are you saying? I'm saying we need to think practically about our situation. If your mother has really cut you off, if she's serious about this, then we need to figure out how to fix it or find alternatives. Alternatives? My parents offered to help us get established. A job at Daddy's firm, a small house in their neighborhood, a more sustainable lifestyle. You want me to work for your father? I want us to be realistic about our options. Your mother has made it clear that her support comes with strings attached, strings that include accepting behavior that's frankly manipulative and inappropriate. Inappropriate. Daniel, she excluded herself from our wedding by making unreasonable demands about the guest list. When we made the practical decision to keep things small and elegant, she retaliated by trying to destroy your livelihood. That's not normal motherly behavior. I stared at my wife, trying to understand how she could reframe the situation so completely. She didn't make unreasonable demands. She just wanted to attend the wedding she paid for. She wanted to attend a wedding where she wouldn't fit in, where her presence would have been awkward for everyone involved. We were trying to spare her embarrassment. We were trying to spare your parents' embarrassment. Sophie's eyes flashed. My parents have been nothing but gracious about your family situation. They accepted that you came from a different background, they welcomed you into their social circle, they introduced you to business contacts who could help your career. And this is how your family repays their kindness. By expecting basic respect. By throwing a tantrum when they don't get their way. The argument was escalating, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath us. We'd been married for 4 days, and already we were fighting about money and family in ways that felt fundamental, irreparable. Sophie, I said quietly, what do you want me to do? I want you to fix this. Talk to your mother, apologize, whatever it takes. Get your trust fund unlocked and your business running again. And if I can't, Sophie was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was cool and practical. Then we need to seriously evaluate whether this marriage is sustainable. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. My wife of 4 days was already considering whether our relationship was worth maintaining if the money disappeared. You'd leave me over this? I'd leave a situation that isn't financially viable, yes. Daniel, I married you because I thought we were building a life together. If that life isn't possible, then we need to reconsider our options. I looked around our kitchen at the expensive wedding gifts and the lifestyle we'd been so proud of, and realized that everything I thought I'd built was as fragile as soap bubbles. My mother had been supporting not just me, but the version of myself that Sophie had fallen in love with. Without that support, I wasn't the successful consultant with the trust fund and the family wealth. I was just a man with a mediocre income and a dependent personality. And my wife was already doing the math on whether I was worth keeping. I'll fix it, I said, though I had no idea how. Good, Sophie replied, turning back to the wedding gifts. Because I'm not going backwards in life, Daniel. Not for anyone. As I watched her carefully unwrap another crystal glass, I realized that my mother hadn't just frozen my trust fund. She'd frozen my entire world, leaving me to discover what was real and what had been built on her generosity. The answer was more terrifying than I'd imagined. Emily's transformation over the following weeks was remarkable to witness. Without the burden of working nights at the nursing home, she threw herself into her final semester of nursing school with an intensity that reminded me of myself at her age, focused, determined, hungry for knowledge and success. I picked her up for lunch on a Tuesday afternoon, arriving at her apartment to find her in scrubs, having just returned from a clinical rotation at the children's hospital. Aunt Aliar, she called from her bedroom window. Come up. I have something to show you. I climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, using the key she'd given me months ago. Inside, the small space had been transformed. The thrift store furniture was still there, but everything was organized with military precision. Medical textbooks were arranged by subject, study guides color-coded and tabbed, a schedule on the wall mapped out every hour of her day. But what caught my attention was the kitchen table, which was covered with official-looking documents. "What's all this?" I asked, settling into the familiar chair where I'd helped her study so many times. "Job offers," Emily said, her face glowing with pride. "3 of them. Children's Hospital wants me for their pediatric intensive care unit. General Hospital offered me a position in their trauma center. And St. Mary's wants me for their cardiac surgery team." I picked up the letters, scanning the salaries and benefit packages with growing amazement. These weren't entry-level positions for new graduates. These were competitive placements that experienced nurses would envy. "Emily, these are incredible opportunities. How did you manage to get such good offers?" "My clinical supervisors have been writing recommendations," she said, settling into the chair across from me. Apparently, working nights at the nursing home while going to school showed them I could handle pressure and long hours. And my grades, well, you know my grades. I did know her grades. Emily was graduating summa cum laude, with the highest GPA in her nursing class. While other students had been partying or working minimal hours to get by, Emily had been caring for elderly patients and studying until dawn, driven by a work ethic I'd rarely seen. "Which offer are you going to accept?" "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." Emily pulled out a 4th document I hadn't noticed. "There's actually another option I've been considering." The letterhead read Morrison Medical Group, one of the most prestigious private practices in the state. I recognized the name from my years working in hospitals. Morrison was where doctors sent their own families for care. "Emily, how did you even get an interview with Morrison?"
Dr.
Patricia Morrison came to speak to our graduating class last month. She was looking for a nurse with exceptional academic credentials to join their cardiothoracic surgery team. My advisor recommended me. I read the offer letter with growing astonishment. The salary was 30% higher than the hospital positions, the benefits package was extraordinary, and the opportunity for advancement was clearly laid out. "This is an incredible opportunity, sweetheart. You'd be working with some of the best surgeons in the country." "I know. And Aunt Aliar, there's something else." Emily reached across the table and took my hands. "Dr. Morrison mentioned that they're looking for someone who might eventually be interested in management responsibilities. Someone who could help run the business side of the practice while maintaining clinical skills." The implications hit me immediately. Emily wasn't just being offered a job. She was being offered a career path that could lead to real wealth and influence in the medical community. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I needed to discuss it with my family." Emily smiled. "That's you, in case you were wondering." My heart swelled with pride and love for this young woman who considered me family, who valued my opinion enough to base major life decisions on our conversations. "Emily, this is your choice to make. Any of these positions would be wonderful opportunities." "I know. But I also know that you've always dreamed of being involved in something bigger than just working as a staff nurse. You've mentioned wanting to understand the business side of healthcare, maybe even opening your own practice someday." It was true. During my 35 years as a nurse, I'd often thought about how healthcare could be delivered more efficiently, more compassionately. I'd watched administrators make decisions that hurt both patients and staff, and I dreamed of running a medical facility that prioritized care over profits. "What are you thinking?" I asked carefully. "I'm thinking that if I take the Morrison position, learn the business side of private practice, maybe someday we could partner on something. Maybe start our own clinic, focus on providing excellent care to patients who can't usually afford concierge-level service." The vision she was painting was compelling, a medical practice that combined Emily's clinical skills with my experience and business sense, serving the community that had given us both so much. That's a beautiful dream, Emily. But it would require significant capital, business licenses, insurance, equipment.
I know.
But Aunt Aliar, if what you've told me about your estate plans is true, if I'm really going to inherit your assets someday, then maybe we could use that money to build something meaningful instead of just letting it sit in bank accounts. I looked at this young woman, barely 24 years old, who was already thinking beyond her own success to how she could use her advantages to help others. The contrast with Daniel was so stark it took my breath away. You'd want to invest your inheritance in a medical practice? I'd want to invest it in a legacy. Something that would honor your years of service, help people who need it, and create jobs for other healthcare workers. Something that would make a real difference. I felt tears prick my eyes. This was what I dreamed of when I'd first started nursing, being part of something that mattered, something that helped heal the world rather than just collecting paychecks. Emily, if you're serious about this path, if you really want to build something together, then I think you should take the Morrison position. Learn everything you can about how successful medical practices operate. And when you're ready, when you're ready, we'll start planning our own clinic. Not someday in the distant future, but soon, within the next few years. Emily's face lit up with joy and excitement. Really? You'd want to do that? I can't think of anything I'd rather do with the rest of my career than build something meaningful with someone who shares my values. We spent the next 2 hours talking about possibilities, what kind of practice we might establish, what communities we could serve, how we could structure it to provide both excellent care and living wages for our staff. By the time I left Emily's apartment, we had the skeleton of a business plan and a timeline that could make it reality within 3 years. As I drove home, I thought about Daniel and Sophie, probably struggling with their financial crisis, fighting about money and blame, and whose fault everything was. Then I thought about Emily, turning down good job offers to pursue great ones, already planning how to use her future success to help others. The contrast was devastating and validating at the same time. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Daniel's number flashed on the screen. His 15th call in 2 days. This time, I answered. Hello, Daniel.
Mom.
Finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. We need to talk about this situation. The situation where you excluded me from your wedding after I paid for it. Mom, please. Sophie and I have been talking, and we realize we handled things badly. We want to make it up to you. How thoughtful. And how do you propose to do that? We want to take you to dinner. Somewhere nice. We want to apologize properly and talk about how to move forward. Move forward. Work out the trust fund issue, get things back to normal. I sat in my car in my own driveway, listening to my son try to negotiate his way back into my financial good graces, and realized that he still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. He thought this was about hurt feelings that could be soothed with dinner and apologies, not about fundamental respect and character. Daniel, I said quietly, there is no moving forward. There is no getting back to normal. You made a choice about what our relationship was worth, and now you're living with the consequences of that choice. But Mom, I have to go, Daniel. I'm having dinner with someone who actually appreciates my presence. I hung up before he could respond, then sat in my car for a few more minutes, processing the conversation. Daniel still thought he could fix this with charm and apologies, still believed that our relationship was something he could manage rather than something he should cherish. Inside my house, I pulled out my laptop and began researching business loan applications for medical practices. If Emily and I were going to build something together, I wanted to understand every aspect of the process. For the first time in years, I was planning for a future that excited me rather than disappointed me. A future built with someone who valued my wisdom instead of just my wallet. And if Daniel wanted to watch from the sidelines while I built a meaningful life with someone else, well, he'd made that choice himself. The eviction notice was taped to our apartment door when Sophie and I returned from what she dubbed our crisis management dinner with her parents. 3 days to vacate the premises or face legal action for non-payment of rent. This can't be happening, Sophie whispered, staring at the official document like it might change if she looked at it hard enough. But it was happening. It had been happening for weeks, a slow-motion disaster I'd been too proud and too stupid to fully acknowledge. The consulting business was dead. Without access to my trust fund, I couldn't make payroll for my 2 part-time employees, couldn't cover office rent, couldn't even afford the software subscriptions that kept our systems running. My business partner had walked away when the money dried up, taking our 3 biggest clients with him. The $60,000 loan was due in 6 days, and I didn't have $60 in my checking account, let alone $60,000. Sophie's parents had made their position clear over dinner. They would help us, help her, but only if we moved back to their town, lived in their guest house, and I took a junior position at her father's accounting firm. The salary would be barely above minimum wage, appropriate for someone with no real experience in their field. It was charity and we all knew it. Maybe we should call your mother, Sophie said as we stood in our kitchen, surrounded by wedding gifts we couldn't afford to keep. Maybe if you really apologized, if we both apologized. I tried that. She won't even talk to me. Then we'll go over there. Show up at her house. Force her to listen. I thought about my mother's face during our last conversation, the cold finality in her voice when she told me I no longer had an open invitation to her house. Sophie, she's made her position clear. She's done with me. She can't be done with you. You're her son. She's just angry, and angry people say things they don't mean. We'll go over there. We'll grovel if we have to. We'll make her understand that we're sorry and we've learned our lesson. The desperation in Sophie's voice was painful to hear. My beautiful, composed wife was unraveling, and it was my fault for building our life on foundation that wasn't really mine. Even if she forgives me, even if she unlocks the trust fund, we still owe $60,000 immediately. That money is gone, Sophie. We spent it on the wedding, on this apartment, on the lifestyle we thought we could afford. Then we'll ask for more. We'll ask her to pay off the loan. Ask her for more money after what we did? People forgive their children, Daniel. That's what parents do. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to think that the woman who'd raised me, who'd sacrificed everything for my success, would eventually forgive this betrayal. But I kept remembering the way she'd looked at me in her living room. Not angry, not hurt, but finished.
Done.
The phone rang, and Sophie grabbed it desperately, hoping it was some miraculous solution to our crisis. It's the bank, she said, holding out the phone to me. About the loan. I took the call, already knowing what they were going to tell me. Payment was due in 6 days. No extensions would be granted. If the loan wasn't satisfied, they would begin collection procedures, which would include seizing business assets and pursuing legal action. What about bankruptcy? Sophie asked after I hung up. What about it? Could we file for bankruptcy? Start over. Sophie, I'm 32 years old. Bankruptcy would destroy my credit for years. No one would hire me. No one would rent to us. We'd be completely shut out of any decent lifestyle. As opposed to our current situation, which is what exactly? She had a point. Our current situation was homelessness in 3 days, unemployment, and no prospects for improvement. My parents' offer is still on the table, Sophie said quietly. Your parents' offer involves me becoming their charity case. Their charity case with a roof over his head and a steady paycheck. I looked around our apartment. The granite countertops, the hardwood floors, the view of the city skyline that had made us feel so successful. In 3 days, it would all belong to someone else. Is that really what you want? I asked. To move back to your hometown, live in your parents' guest house, pretend that our marriage is something it isn't. Sophie was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to not be homeless, Daniel. I want to be able to pay my bills and hold my head up in public. If that makes me shallow, then I guess I'm shallow. And if I say no, if I want to try to rebuild on our own, find jobs we can get without family help, start over from scratch, then you'll be rebuilding alone. The words hung between us like a death sentence. My wife of 2 weeks was giving me an ultimatum: accept charity from her family or lose her entirely. You'd really leave me over this? I'd leave a situation that has no future. Daniel, without your mother's support, what exactly are you? You have a college degree, but no real work experience. You have business skills, but no capital to use them. You have good intentions, but no ability to follow through when things get difficult. Each word was like a knife, cutting deeper because I knew they were true. I'd spent my entire adult life depending on my mother's financial support, using her generosity as a safety net that let me take risks and make grand gestures without real consequences. Now the safety net was gone and I was falling. I could get a regular job. Sales, maybe, or insurance. Start at the bottom and work my way up. At your age? With no experience? Daniel, be realistic. You'd be competing with 22-year-olds who are hungry and willing to work for nothing. What do you have to offer that they don't? Experience running a business. A business that failed the moment your mommy stopped funding it. The cruelty in her voice shocked me. This was Sophie, beautiful, elegant Sophie, who I'd fallen in love with, who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer. Apparently, poorer wasn't really part of the plan. Sophie, we've been married for 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which our entire financial foundation has collapsed because you couldn't maintain a relationship with the person funding our lifestyle. She cut me off because we didn't invite her to our wedding. She cut you off because you treated her like garbage while taking her money. There's a difference. The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Sophie was right. I had been taking Mom's money while treating her like an inconvenience, accepting her generosity while giving her nothing but disappointment in return. But acknowledging that truth didn't solve our immediate crisis. What do you want me to do? I asked. I want you to go to your mother's house tomorrow morning. I want you to get down on your knees if you have to. I want you to beg her to forgive you and restore your trust fund. I want you to promise her anything, that we'll have another wedding and invite her properly, that we'll spend every holiday with her, that we'll name our firstborn child after her. Whatever it takes. And if she says no? Sophie looked around our apartment one more time, her gaze lingering on the wedding gifts, the expensive furniture, the life we'd built on borrowed money and borrowed time. Then we'll know where we stand, won't we? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Sophie slept beside me, her back turned away from me in a rejection that felt like a preview of our future. In 2 weeks, I'd gone from successful businessman with a trust fund and a beautiful wife to unemployed debtor facing homelessness and divorce. All because I'd been too embarrassed to have my working-class mother attend my wedding. The irony was devastating. I'd excluded her to impress Sophie's wealthy family, and now Sophie was planning to leave me because I was no longer wealthy enough to impress. I'd traded my mother's unconditional love for conditional acceptance from people who were already planning my exit strategy. And tomorrow, I'd have to swallow what was left of my pride and beg the woman I'd betrayed to save me from consequences I'd earned. The question was whether she'd still care enough to say yes. Or whether, like Sophie, she'd already decided I wasn't worth the investment. Daniel arrived at my house on a Saturday morning, earlier than I expected, but not early enough to catch me unprepared. I'd been awake since dawn, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through my kitchen window, thinking about the conversation I knew was coming. Emily had graduated the day before, summa cum laude, just as we'd expected. The ceremony had been beautiful, held in the university's largest auditorium, packed with families celebrating their children's achievements. I'd sat in the third row, bursting with pride as Emily walked across that stage, diploma in hand, ready to begin the career we'd planned together. Daniel hadn't been there, of course. He didn't even know Emily existed. I heard his car in the driveway. The engine sounded worse than before, sputtering and grinding like it needed repairs he couldn't afford. Through my living room window, I watched him sit in the driver's seat for several minutes, gathering courage for what he knew would be the most important conversation of his life. When he finally actually knocked, instead of walking in uninvited, I let him stand there for a full 30 seconds before answering. Small lesson in what it felt like to wait for someone else's permission. Hello, Daniel. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting desperation. This wasn't the confident man who'd excluded me from his wedding just 3 weeks ago. This was someone who'd learned what it felt like when the world stopped revolving around his needs. Mom, thank you for seeing me. I haven't invited you in yet. May I come in? Please? The please was new. I couldn't remember the last time Daniel had asked for anything politely instead of assuming it would be granted. You may. I led him to the living room where we'd had our last conversation, where I'd explained the consequences of his choices. He sat on the edge of the couch like he wasn't sure he was welcome to get comfortable. Mom, I need to apologize to you. Really apologize, not just say the words to get what I want. This was also new, Daniel acknowledging that his previous apologies had been manipulative rather than genuine.
I'm listening.
I treated you horribly, not just with the wedding, but for years. I took your love for granted, took your money for granted, took everything you sacrificed for me and acted like I deserved it instead of being grateful for it. He was crying now, not the angry tears of our previous fight, but the broken sobs of someone who'd finally understood what they'd lost. I excluded you from my wedding because I was ashamed of you, and that makes me a terrible person. I was ashamed of your job, your house, your background. All the things that made you who you are, all the things I should have been proud of instead of embarrassed by. Why were you ashamed, Daniel? Because Sophie's family has money. Real money, old money, and they made me feel like I wasn't good enough unless I came from the same kind of background. So I pretended I did. I pretended you were someone different, someone more like them. And when reality didn't match the pretense? I chose the pretense over reality. I chose strangers' opinions over my own mother's feelings. I chose to protect my image instead of protecting the person who loved me. It was the most honest thing Daniel had ever said to me, and also the most devastating. He'd been ashamed of me, ashamed of the woman who'd worked double shifts to pay for his education, who'd sacrificed her own comfort to ensure his success. Daniel, do you understand what you're really apologizing for? For being ungrateful, for being selfish, for taking your love and turning it into something transactional.
Yes. And
he was quiet for a long moment, struggling with the deeper truth he'd been avoiding. For never actually loving you the way you loved me. For seeing you as a resource instead of as a person. There it was, the core of our dysfunction, finally spoken aloud. And now I've lost everything. Sophie's threatening to leave me. The business is gone. We're being evicted. The loan is due in 3 days, and I don't have the money. I've destroyed my entire life because I was too stupid to value the one person who actually cared about me. So you're here because you need money. No. The word came out desperate, panicked. I mean, yes, I need money, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I need my mother. I need the woman who raised me, who loved me even when I didn't deserve it, who always believed I could be better than I was. But you do need money. Daniel's face crumpled. Yes. I need money. $60,000, or they're going to destroy what's left of my credit and probably put me in jail. And I need the trust fund unlocked, or Sophie and I are going to be homeless. And if I say no, then I'll figure out another way. I'll take charity from Sophie's parents, or I'll file for bankruptcy, or I'll move back in with you and start over from nothing. But, Mom, even if you never give me another penny, I need you to forgive me. I need you to let me try to be the son you deserved. It was a pretty speech, and parts of it might even have been sincere. But I'd heard Daniel's pretty speeches before, and I'd learned to judge him by his actions rather than his words. Daniel, do you remember Emily Carson? The question clearly confused him. Emily who? Emily Carson. Margaret Carson's daughter. Margaret was my best friend before she died 2 years ago. I vaguely. The girl whose mother was in that car accident. That's right. Emily is 24 years old, just graduated from nursing school summa cum laude, and has been accepted to one of the most prestigious medical practices in the state. Daniel looked puzzled by this change of subject, unsure how Emily Carson related to his financial crisis. Emily has been like a daughter to me since Margaret's death. Grateful for every kindness, hardworking, focused on building a meaningful career rather than just making money. She calls me regularly just to check on my well-being, remembers my birthday, sends thank you notes for the smallest gestures. Understanding was beginning to dawn in Daniel's eyes, and I could see the fear growing. Daniel, I've named Emily as the primary beneficiary of my estate. The house, my retirement accounts, everything that would have gone to you. It's going to her now. What? The word came out as a whisper. Emily is the daughter I never had, the child who appreciates love when it's given. She's also the one who'll be making decisions about my care if I become unable to do so myself. Mom, you can't. She's not even family. Isn't she? She shows up when I need her. She values my opinion. She includes me in the important moments of her life. She treats me with respect and genuine affection. What exactly makes family, Daniel? Blood? Or behavior? Daniel was on his feet now, pacing my living room like a caged animal. This is insane. You can't leave everything to some stranger. Emily isn't a stranger. She's been part of my life for years while you've been taking me for granted. She's earned my love and my trust in ways you never bothered to do. I'm your son. You're the man who excluded me from his wedding after I paid for it. You're the person who chose strangers' opinions over his own mother's dignity. You're someone who only calls when he needs money and only visits when he's in crisis. That's going to change. I promise you, that's going to change. Based on what? Your track record of broken promises? Your history of taking my generosity for granted? Daniel, you've had 32 years to be the son I deserved. Why should I believe you'll change now? Because I've learned my lesson. Because losing everything has shown me what really matters. Has it? Or have you just learned that actions have consequences, and you don't like facing them? Daniel stopped pacing and stared at me with something approaching desperation. What do you want from me? What do I have to do to prove that I've changed? Nothing. Nothing. Daniel, you can't prove you've changed. Change isn't something you demonstrate with grand gestures or pretty speeches. Change is something you live consistently over time. And I'm no longer willing to give you that time. But I'm your son. You're a grown man who made his choices. You chose to exclude me from your wedding. You chose to take my money while giving me nothing but disappointment in return. You chose to value strangers' opinions over your own mother's feelings. Now you get to live with those choices. This isn't about the money. This has never been about the money. Then what's it about? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised who'd become someone I barely recognized, and felt a profound sadness settle over me. It's about respect. It's about love. It's about treating the people who care about you with basic human dignity. And those aren't things you can pay back, Daniel. Those are things you either have or you don't. I can learn to have them. At 32? After 30 years of taking them for granted? I don't think so. Daniel was crying again, and part of me, the part that had rocked him through childhood nightmares, that had cheered at his school plays, that had believed in his potential even when he failed, wanted to comfort him. But the larger part of me, the part that had been betrayed and dismissed and treated like disposable help, remained unmoved. Mom, please. I know I don't deserve it, but please give me one more chance. I gave you chances for 30 years, Daniel. I gave you chances every time you disappointed me, every time you took my support for granted, every time you treated me like an obligation instead of a person. The wedding wasn't your first mistake. It was just your last one. So, Emily gets everything? This stranger gets the life that should have been mine. Emily gets the life she's earned through gratitude, hard work, and genuine affection. You get the life you've earned through selfishness, entitlement, and casual cruelty. This isn't fair. Fair. I stood up, feeling anger rise in my chest for the first time during this conversation. Fair would have been being invited to the wedding I paid for. Fair would have been basic respect from the son I raised alone after his father abandoned us. Fair would have been gratitude instead of entitlement, love instead of manipulation. I do love you. No, Daniel. You love what I can provide for you. There's a difference. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the finality of what I was telling him.
So, this is it?
After everything we've been through, you're just going to walk away from your only child. I'm not walking away, Daniel. You walked away years ago. You just kept coming back for money. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of 32 years of disappointment and betrayal. What am I supposed to do now? He asked quietly. What adults do. Figure it out yourself.
Get a job, any job.
Learn to live within your means. Stop expecting other people to solve your problems. And Sophie? What about Sophie? She's going to leave me if I can't provide the lifestyle she wants. I thought about this woman I'd never really met, who'd married my son partly for his family money, who was already planning her exit strategy now that the money was gone. Then she was never worth keeping. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one losing everything. Aren't I? I'm losing my only child. The boy I raised, the man I hoped you'd become, the son who might have taken care of me in my old age. I'm losing all of that, Daniel. The only difference is that I'm choosing to lose it with dignity. Daniel stood up slowly, understanding finally that there would be no reconciliation, no restoration of his trust fund, no magical solution to the crisis he'd created. I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I know you are. And I'm sorry too. Sorry that it took losing everything for you to understand what you'd thrown away. He walked to the front door, moving like an old man despite being only 32. At the threshold, he turned back to me one last time. Will you ever forgive me? I thought about the question seriously, looking at this broken man who'd once been my baby boy. Forgiveness isn't the issue, Daniel. The issue is trust. And that's something that, once broken, can't be repaired with apologies. He nodded, understanding finally that this was goodbye in all the ways that mattered. Take care of yourself, Mom. I will. And Daniel, take care of yourself too. For the first time in your life, you're going to have to. I closed the door behind him and stood in my entryway, listening to his car start up, that rough engine that needed repairs he couldn't afford. As the sound faded down my street, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of loving someone who couldn't love me back was finally lifted from my shoulders. My phone rang, and Emily's name appeared on the screen. Aunt Aliar. I got the Morrison job. Dr. Morrison called this morning and offered me the position. I start Monday. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I hope you know that. And I couldn't have found meaning in my life without you, Emily. I hope you know that too. As we talked about her first day, her excitement about the future, her gratitude for the opportunities she'd been given, I realized that I hadn't lost a child at all. I'd simply found the right one. 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming lobby of Carson Gray Medical Associates, watching Emily consult with a young mother whose toddler had been running a fever. The little boy clung to his mother's hand, but his eyes were fixed on Emily with the kind of trust that only children can give so freely. "He's going to be just fine," Emily told the mother, her voice carrying the perfect blend of professional confidence and genuine warmth. "It's just a minor ear infection. The antibiotics will have him feeling better within a day or two." The mother's relief was visible. "Thank you so much, Miss Carson. When I called other offices, they said they couldn't see him for 2 weeks. I was so worried." "That's exactly why we're here," Emily replied, walking them to the reception desk. "Children can't wait 2 weeks when they're sick." I watched from my office doorway as Emily handled the checkout process, explaining the payment plan we offered for families without insurance, ensuring the mother understood the medication schedule, and handing the little boy a sticker for being brave during his examination. This was what we'd built together, a medical practice that served the community Emily and I had both grown up in, offering high-quality care at prices working families could afford. Carson Gray Medical Associates had been open for 4 months, and we were already booked solid. Emily had kept her promise to Dr. Morrison, working with a prestigious practice for 2 years to learn everything she could about running a medical business. She'd absorbed knowledge like a sponge: billing procedures, insurance negotiations, staff management, patient care protocols. When she finally gave her notice to start our clinic, Dr. Morrison had offered to double her salary to make her stay. Emily had thanked her graciously and declined. Mrs. Gray, my receptionist, Janet, appeared at my elbow. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here. Mrs. Henderson, for her diabetes follow-up."
Thank you, Janet.
"Send her right in." I'd returned to nursing after 20 years away from patient care and discovered that I loved it more than ever. At 60, I had the experience to handle complex cases and the wisdom to comfort frightened patients. Working alongside Emily, building something meaningful together, had given my career a second chapter I'd never expected. Mrs. Henderson was 75, diabetic, and had been managing her condition poorly before she became our patient. Her previous doctor had spent 10 minutes with her per visit, adjusted her medications without explanation, and made her feel like a burden on the healthcare system. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Henderson?" I asked as she settled into the comfortable chair beside my desk. "So much better. My blood sugar has been stable for 2 months now, and I finally understand why I need to test it regularly." Emily explained it in a way that actually made sense. This was the difference Emily and I had hoped to make. Instead of rushing patients through assembly line appointments, we spent time with them. We listened to their concerns, explained their conditions, and treated them like human beings rather than insurance claims. "Your numbers look excellent," I said, reviewing her chart. "You've really taken control of your health. It helps to have doctors who actually care whether I get better or not." After Mrs. Henderson left, I sat in my office reviewing the day's appointments and feeling a deep satisfaction I'd never experienced in my years as a staff nurse. This practice wasn't making us wealthy. We'd structured it specifically to serve patients who couldn't afford concierge medicine, but it was making us both rich in ways that mattered. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emily. "Dinner at my place tonight? I'm making that pasta dish you taught me." Emily had moved into a lovely townhouse 6 blocks from the clinic, close enough to walk to work, but far enough to maintain some separation between her professional and personal life. I'd helped her buy it, not with inherited money, which she wouldn't receive until after my death, but with a loan I'd been happy to provide. "I'll bring dessert," I texted back, "and wine to celebrate Mrs. Patterson's pregnancy test." Mrs. Patterson was 34 and had been trying to conceive for 3 years. She'd come to us after her previous doctor had suggested expensive fertility treatments without first addressing her thyroid condition. Emily had caught the thyroid issue immediately, treated it with simple medication, and Mrs. Patterson had conceived naturally within 6 months. As I locked up the office that evening, I found myself thinking about Daniel. I hadn't spoken to him since that final conversation in my living room, but I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. He and Sophie had divorced within 2 months of his financial collapse. He'd moved back in with Sophie's parents temporarily, working at her father's accounting firm for a salary that barely covered his expenses. The last I'd heard, he was living in a studio apartment across town, working 2 jobs, and trying to pay off the debts he'd accumulated during his years of financial irresponsibility. Sophie had remarried quickly, a lawyer from her father's firm who had both family money and professional success. I felt no satisfaction in Daniel's struggles. Revenge, I discovered, was less rewarding than purpose. Emily was waiting in her kitchen when I arrived, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger than her 26 years. The townhouse was decorated simply but beautifully, filled with books, plants, and photographs of the two of us at various professional events and personal milestones. "How was your day?" she asked, taking the wine I'd brought and opening it with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to appreciate the finer things in life without taking them for granted. "Wonderful. Mrs. Henderson's diabetes is completely under control. Mr. Garcia's blood pressure medication is working perfectly, and little Amy Morrison doesn't need surgery after all, just physical therapy for her hip problem." And Mrs. Patterson? Glowing. 8 weeks along and healthy as a horse. Emily grinned. "I love it when we can help people build families instead of just treating diseases." Over dinner, we talked about the practice, about the new equipment we wanted to purchase, about the community health fair we were planning for the spring. Emily had ideas for expanding our services, maybe adding a pediatric specialist, perhaps partnering with a local pharmacy to provide discounted medications for our patients. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Emily said as we finished the excellent pasta she'd prepared. "Something that might sound presumptuous." "Nothing you could say would sound presumptuous to me, sweetheart. I've been thinking about the future, about what happens when you're ready to retire, or if something happens to you." It was a conversation we'd been avoiding, but Emily was right to bring it up. I was 60 years old and in good health, but medical practices required succession planning. "What are you thinking?" "I want to buy out your share of the practice. Not now, but over time. I want to own Carson Gray Medical Associates outright, so that if something happens to you, it won't have to be sold or liquidated. I want to be able to keep serving this community indefinitely." "Emily, the practice is worth almost $500,000 now. That's a substantial investment." "I know, but I've been saving money, and I've been talking to the bank about business loans. I think I could structure a buyout over maybe 5 years, paying you monthly installments plus interest." I looked across the table at this young woman who'd become everything I'd hoped Daniel would be: responsible, forward-thinking, genuinely committed to building something meaningful rather than just accumulating wealth. "What about my will? You know you're going to inherit my assets eventually." "That's exactly why I want to buy the practice myself," Emily said firmly. "I don't want to own it because you died and left it to me. I want to own it because I earned it, because I worked for it, because I proved I deserved it." The distinction was profound. Emily wanted to achieve her success through her own efforts rather than through inherited wealth. She understood something Daniel had never grasped, that earned achievement was more satisfying than given advantage. "You know what this means?" I asked. "What?" "It means that in 5 years, when you own the practice outright, you'll be one of the most successful young medical professionals in the state. You'll have built something significant entirely through your own efforts." That's the idea. "And it means that when I do retire, I'll have the satisfaction of knowing that everything we built together will continue to serve this community for decades to come. Hopefully for the rest of my career. I raised my wine glass to Carson Gray Medical Associates and to the most remarkable young woman I've ever known. To family, Emily corrected, raising her own glass. The kind you choose, not the kind you're born with. As we toasted, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman betrayed by her only child, heartbroken and angry and alone. Tonight, I was sitting in the home of someone who loved me genuinely, celebrating a business we'd built together, planning a future that excited us both. Daniel's betrayal had cost me a son, but it had given me something more valuable, the opportunity to build a real family with someone who deserved my love. My phone rang as Emily and I were cleaning up the dishes. Daniel's name flashed on the screen for the first time in months. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then declined the call. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, noticing my expression. "Everything's perfect," I said, meaning it completely. Whatever Daniel wanted, forgiveness, money, reconciliation, it was too late. I'd built a new life with someone who valued what I had to offer, someone who saw our relationship as a gift rather than a transaction. Some bridges, once burned, weren't worth rebuilding. But some relationships, chosen rather than inherited, were worth everything. As I drove home that night, past the modest house that would someday be Emily's, past the clinic where we worked together every day, past the community we served together, I realized that revenge wasn't about destroying someone who'd hurt you. Real revenge was building a life so fulfilling, so meaningful, so rich with genuine relationships that the person who'd betrayed you became completely irrelevant. Daniel could keep calling. He could keep regretting his choices, keep struggling with the consequences of his selfishness, keep wondering what might have been if he'd chosen differently. But I wouldn't be answering those calls because I'd be too busy living the life I deserved. Surrounded by people who chose to love me, building something that mattered, creating a legacy based on character rather than blood. The golden goose had found someone worthy of her eggs. And this time, she was smart enough never to let go. And that, beautiful souls, is the power of a mother's love transformed into unstoppable strength. Eliar's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt us. It's building a life so beautiful, so meaningful, so full of genuine love that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of chosen family over blood family, then hit that subscribe button and join our community of strong, resilient women sharing their truth. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be valued, you deserve to be respected, and you deserve to build your legacy with people who recognize your worth.